Welcome back. This is the Big Blue Banter New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneier, joined as always by my co-host Nick Filato. Today we're here to do another little bit of bye-week content, and we're going to take a look at the midseason awards for the New York Football Giants, the midseason superlatives, things that stood out to us, things that we wanted to dive into. At the midseason point when the Giants are 6-2, coming off the bye week, headed into a game against the Texans that might be a little trickier than we originally thought, just because they kind of gave the Eagles a tough game. And now Xavier McKinney's going to be out. So that's kind of annoying, but we'll see. I still have a lot of confidence in that game. And then the Lions as well, who beat the Packers just recently and showed a little bit of fight. I feel like, Nick, every single time the Lions win a game over these last couple of Dan Campbell seasons, we get like these insane locker room videos of like everyone emotional, everyone hugging. It's just like, it's like you get like one or two wins a year and they're just like, and I just almost feel bad for them. Maybe hopefully that franchise will turn around. I know some Lions fans, so I just wanted to say I feel a little bad for them. But we got those two games coming up. Giants, in my mind, are in must-win situations. I think if they lose to the Texans or the Lions, it's not only going to be surprising and devastating, but it's going to be really detrimental to their chances of making the playoffs. Now, we'll see if that turns out to be true or not. They do have some easy games coming up even later in the season. The Colts now looking like an easy game, but I don't think it's going to help. Let's say that much. So before we dive into any of that later on this week and later on in the coming weeks, let's talk about some mid-season bye-week fun, some superlatives. I want to start with the one that is always kind of fun to talk about. The biggest surprise of the season for you, Nick. Who is the biggest surprise of this season? And it could be a player, a development, a coach, anything like that.
I think there are a lot of ways we can take this. Now, I think the coaching would be the biggest surprise because we figured there would be a coaching upgrade. It's hard to kind of be a decline from what we've seen over the last several seasons. But how this team has been able to adjust their game plans in game and win these close games have, to me, been a refreshing surprise. But I wouldn't say it's the biggest surprise because we knew Brian Daboll was sharp. I think the biggest surprise is the same thing that you tweeted, and that is the play of the cornerbacks behind Adoree Jackson. And that mainly includes Fabian Moreau, who has stepped in and been a solid, I would say, cornerback too, opposite of Adoree Jackson, making several big plays against really good competition like DK Metcalf and coming up really big in the situation at the end of the Jacksonville game, but also players like Nick McLeod, who have made really impactful plays, few and far between, but that tackle on Christian Kirk's end around was huge. He also had a really nice route where he carried him up and he rode him off the red line, provided the quarterback no space to drop the little teardrop in over the shoulder of the wide receiver. So I think the cornerback play in general behind Adoree Jackson, which was, if we go back just a couple months, Dan, that was our biggest concern, right? All offseason, we talked about the biggest concern is what happens if Aaron Robinson or Adoree Jackson gets injured. Well, this is the New York Giants. Of course, one of those things is going to happen. Aaron Robinson gets injured, and then the Giants are still able to patchwork their defense with a bunch of veteran free agents like Fabian Moreau. So that has to be the biggest surprise, in my opinion, and I believe in your opinion as well.
Yeah, Fabian Moreau was my pick as well. I think you did a great job explaining it. I just didn't expect this, given his career trajectory, given some of the snaps on film he had. I mean, let's be honest about it. He's playing great ball now. He hadn't always played great ball early in his career. There's some tape that you've watched, Nick, and that we've seen circulated around that wasn't exactly what we're seeing now with the Giants. We're getting a different level player. Now, as part of that, the coaching in the secondary, yes, I think so. As part of that, the system fit, that's probably even more so. What's going on. But a lot of this is just on him. Like, a lot of these are just him being in the right spot at the right time, him breaking on the ball, his vision, his decisiveness, his instincts. These are maybe traits that just injuries and other factors have kind of limited him in the past. But right now, they're getting really competent play from the cornerback two positions, to the point where I'm even like, can they re-sign this dude, get back Aaron Robinson, get back Cordell Flott, and maybe have the opportunity and flexibility to not have to go corner up top with their draft picks and with their major draft capital. That's the point we've gotten to. That's why he's my pick. There's other guys that you can mention. You've talked about some. Jihad Ward belongs in that mix for sure for me. I would even say, like, before the injury, Bredesen was starting to come on. He could have been in that mix as well. Bellinger to me is a surprise. I never thought he'd play this amazing in his first season. Chris Myrick to me is somebody who I would say is a surprise, dude. I just wasn't expecting him to be like a plus contributor, someone who, when he's on the field, is definitely a positive impactor on your football team. So a lot of guys in the mix, but Fabian Moreau is for sure the guy for me, just given the fact that, look, he's turned this cornerback two position, I should say, from a weakness into at best a strength, but probably more likely an average solid piece.
which is all the New York Giants need. We just thought it was going to be one of those things where opposing quarterbacks would just absolutely exploit the fact that Adoree Jackson didn't have another comparable starter next to him. And while Adoree Jackson is better than Fabian Moreau right now, Fabian Moreau is exceeding our expectations. I think there's one player that you left off the list, and Daniel Bellinger, he'll show up a little bit later on in this list because he's definitely a huge surprise and a pleasant one at that. But I think O'Shane Ximenez is another player that we should mention because he's somebody who had a solid rookie season, right? He flashed, he's quick. We like that. You know, he has a big body, but he's had injury-plagued years and kind of just fizzled out under Joe Judge's tutelage. Now he is injured, but when he was healthy, he was a really impactful player that Wink Martindale was utilizing to his full potential. He has 10 pressures, 2 sacks on the season, and I think he's playing the best football that we've seen from O'Shane Ximenez, possibly even maxing out his potential at least right now, which he's still a young player. So I think he definitely deserves to be a big surprise. And if he comes back healthy, he'll be a really nice rotational piece in what is now a deeper edge room.
Yeah, great call. Let's go with your breakout player of the year. And I think this is another one where there are a lot of options and a lot of players in the mix. We just had Fabian Moreau. Both Nick and I chose Fabian Moreau for biggest surprise. We'll see if we have the same guy for breakout player of the year. You can talk about your process and your pick.
Yeah, I think breakout player, there's only really one for the New York Giants, and it's just because he has broken out so much from last year to this year. And I've been one of the guys who have just been standing on the Dexter Lawrence bandwagon saying, no, he's good, just give him a shot. And now he's actually finishing those sacks. The film checks out. Everything checks out with Dexter Lawrence, and I think he is the true breakout. I don't even know who else would be in the conversation if we're not including Saquon Barkley. Maybe you could say Andrew Thomas, but anybody who watched the film or watched the Giants last year knew he was a developing player who was already trending towards this type of acknowledgement that he's receiving now nationally. So I think Dexter Lawrence is the only answer.
The players in the mix, I would say, would be Andrew Thomas, only because he was playing really great last year, and now he might be the best offensive tackle in the NFL. So I think that is a little bit of a difference from last year to now. I think he is definitely has taken a step. It's a matter of what you consider to be a breakout and how much of the step you actually consider him to take. I think the same case can be said on a lesser level for Adoree Jackson. While he's not the best corner in the NFL right now, and he was actually really good on film last year, for those of you who watched the film or followed along with us, you know we were singing his praises then. I still think he's taken his game to another level this year. So those are two that I put into mind there before making my pick. I considered them both. I also considered the possibility of Saquon Barkley is already breakout. I consider the possibility of putting Daniel Jones in the mix as a breakout player, as the breakout player. I would say for me, he doesn't quite qualify. I think he's done a great job in some of these games. And as I said, in that 4-week stretch, he had a really, really good 4-week stretch before the Seattle game where I felt like he was one of those command type pitchers, those guys who were just in full command. I still didn't feel like he had a 100 miles per hour fastball. I still didn't think he was throwing like a wipeout slider that we saw, aka like a 60-yard, hole shot or some kind of hole shot against cover 2 that we were just like, damn, dude, he tried to fit that ball into the window and he did. Still not seeing a lot of that. Still think a lot of it is kind of operating under the circumstances of what he's being coached to do and doing a good job of that, not turning the ball over, making some big plays with his legs, a couple big throws on third downs with his arm, reading the defense a lot better, moving through his reads a lot faster, processing faster. All of those things could lead to him being a breakout player. So to me, I think the level of jump plays a factor. I just don't quite think he's a breakout yet, right? Like Dexter Lawrence, who's my pick as well, Nick, is an actual true breakout. He's playing like one of the best interior defensive linemen in the NFL. That's what a breakout is to me. So Lawrence gets the pick for me.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. One biggest surprise that we left out was Tamon Fox.
Sure.
That's a huge surprise.
That's a great call. There. Yeah.
Yeah, who's playing a lot of snaps, and he could honestly take the mantle. I would just say he's more of a rotational piece, whereas Fabian Moreau is a part of the starting 11, which gives me the intention to go with Moreau. But in terms of Daniel Jones, and I just looked up his stats, I think everything you said is right. I think this is interesting though, and it's not a crazy stat or anything like that, but in the 2 Giants losses, he was sub 55% completion rate, and those are the only times he was in the below 60% mark. The only game that comes close is the Chicago game where he had a completion rate of 61.5%, but he only attempted, I think, 13 passes in that game. So just a little interesting note. Again, obviously, when you lose football games, you're probably not going to complete as many passes. So it's not groundbreaking, but still, I think having those reliable options underneath, like Daniel Bellinger and things like that, are a big reason why that completion rate is as high as it is. Those easy, schemed check down, get the football into your playmaker's hands, pick up 6, 7, 8 yards
Right.
is one way that the Giants have successfully moved the football down the field.
Yeah, that's probably one the biggest factor for me. I feel like if you just broke it all down and thought back on all the film and all the passing yards they've had, a lot of it has been scheme based. Unfortunately, I mean, it's not trying to take anything away. I don't want to say unfortunately. I don't want to keep qualifying things. I hope people
Yeah.
can understand things on a different level and not look at everything as criticism or praise, because that's not what this is. A lot of it's just pure analysis and evaluation. At least what we try to do. But yeah, I mean, you're still looking at a quarterback who hasn't utilized the field from 20 yards above. If you look at his spray chart, his passing chart, he has just 3 attempts above that have traveled 20 yards in the air. That's a insanely low, or 3 completions, I should say, that have traveled 20 yards in the air. And that's an insanely low number at this point in the season. So really, we have the field very much so cut off from 20 yards from the line of scrimmage to above. That's where almost every single attempt has been thrown. And every single completion has been made for the most part, with the exception of a few. So for that reason alone, it's hard to put him as a breakout passer. You do need to, utilize the intermediate and deep levels of the field if you want to be a long-term success in the NFL for sure, and just a long-term Super Bowl contender, which is what we want the Giants to be. So yeah, can't quite make breakout, but there will be factors that lead to him making another category coming up, at least for me, as a little bit of a spoiler. But I will say the unsung hero. Who's your unsung hero of the season? There's a lot of good candidates for this.
There are a lot of good candidates for this. I think a player like Jihad Ward could make this list. I think you can name a lot of the offensive linemen who have stepped in, and while they have some warts and pass protection, they've been assets as run blockers. But I think the consistent choice that would qualify here is a player that I think is finally gaining recognition. He's a team captain now, and his role is about to expand a lot more, and that is Julian Love. And I know that's the same choice that you have just looking at your list, but when you consider he is the second option at his position with Xavier McKinney there, and just how impactful he is all over the field, he doesn't, I believe, get the recognition that he deserves. I kind of have this thought that he's going to be a Giant next year. I think he's going to be re-signed, and I think he's a very important player to what Wink Martindale wants to do. And if he really steps into the Xavier McKinney role now and really thrives, and the Giants don't miss a beat, and Dane Belton rises his game, then you can really look at Julian Love and say, damn, dude, like, you were really underutilized before. But right now, I really like what he's doing right now in this defense.
That's a great point. I like that take. I was thinking that's something to consider. Like, what, are we going to get to a period of 4 games now? And we're hoping it's 4 games for McKinney. I damn sure can't afford more than 4. I hope it's not more than 4, especially because that one right after is the Eagles game. They need him back for that Eagles game if they want. Yeah. They need all hands on board for that type of game. Just say that. But we might get an opportunity in this 4-game stretch to see if Julian Love is even more important to this defense than we even ever imagined or realized. And
which could play against the Giants, man. If he does have the Giants right. The contract, yeah. Woo.
Yeah, because they need some kind of bargain play here. They're gonna have to dump like $19 million a year, it sounds like, into Saquon Barkley, from what I'm hearing, is what the structure might look like. 19 mil, which is a wild amount for a running back, a lot against the cap. And then Daniel Jones at this point is probably going to require like 30, 33 mil. The Giants have a lot of cap space now, quote unquote. They're in a healthy position. It's around 49 million, I think I saw. But if you go 19 for Daniel Jones, or for Saquon Barkley, and 33 for Daniel Jones, or 35 for Daniel Jones, you're all of a sudden right back where you started from a salary cap situation. Then you still have to consider Dexter Lawrence. You still have to consider Andrew Thomas extension, Julian Love, which has to be re-signed. Julian Love has to be re-signed in my mind at this point, or at least has to be a priority to re-sign at this point. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see if that does impact them. But Julian Love was my pick as well. You mentioned it. I think you mentioned some of the players who could be mentioned in the mix. Daniel Bellinger for sure has to be mentioned in the mix. He's in the mix for a lot of these categories, but he's certainly in the mix for this when you consider what the Giants looked like without him in his first game out against the Seattle Seahawks, and what kind of impact that had on the run game, what kind of impact that had on the tight end depth. So he's in the mix for me as well. You mentioned John Ward. I would say Xavier McKinney belongs in the mix as well. This is my whole thing. We were talking about in the McKinney reaction pod, earlier. Doesn't always show up in the box score, Nick, but damn, when you watch the film, this dude is a beacon of, he's the last line of defense. He is the guy saving them from a lot of bad situations that don't always show up in the box score. but when you watch the tape, like I said, you can notice the impact he's having. So I would put McKinney in that mix as well because he hasn't gotten much fan love this season. I know the interception numbers are down, and that's a big reason for it. But man, is he making key plays on key downs and being that last line of defense. So a lot of those players came into the mix for me, but Julian Love is the one who rises above them all. He just, like you said, he's playing such a variety of roles. He's to me, what really stands out the most is when you watch the film, dude, who's giving more effort on this defense than Julian Love? And that's not to say other guys aren't giving a lot of effort. There are a lot of guys who deserve credit for their effort. Kayvon Thibodeau, you can go, Dexter Lawrence, you can go down the list. I don't think really anyone. I don't really think anyone on this defense has an effort question. That's part of what makes the Wink Martindale defense special. They rally to the football. They're playing with their heads on fire. They're all around the football at all times. But still, even with that said, I just feel like Julian Love has stood out the most from an effort level, and that's what really gives him that superlative for me.
I'm right there with you. Now, who is your X factor, Dan?
Yeah, my pick, and this is probably why, I came around to your side of it and I decided you were the winner of that debate, but my pick is Saquon Barkley. So it's hard for me to sit here and say he's not the MVP of the offense if he's not the X factor, or the MVP of the team if he's not the X factor. And so why he won X factor for me, obviously you can put in any of those guys, Dexter Lawrence, Daniel Jones, Andrew Thomas, as any of those factors. But for me, you take Saquon Barkley out of this, off this team right now, overall, you probably have fewer wins than if you take anyone else off the field. I know that's going to cause some pushback with some people, so I know you're going to get into that, the quarterback side of that. But I think Barkley has been the reason they won the Titans game. Barkley has been the reason. I'd have to think of the other games that he's been the reason, but for sure, the Titans game, he single-handedly won that game himself, in my mind. And even if you look at a game like the Packers game, I know Daniel Jones had that long drive without him, but he also had the switch route that you talked about where he made that big play in the pass game, really sparked the offense back, helped them spark that comeback. So more so than not, I feel like he's been the X factor in the wins for this year. So he's my pick.
Yeah, that's an easy one for me. If anybody didn't hear the last podcast we had, or maybe the next one, I'm not sure how we're going to schedule it, but either way, we discussed how Saquon Barkley and Andrew Thomas are two of the MVPs and the pros and cons to that conversation. So I'm right there with you. And then there's most improved, which you can go in a couple different ways here. Who is your most improved player in 2022?
A lot of players in the mix for most improved. You could even mention some of the guys who've taken those massive jumps, like Andrew Thomas and Adoree Jackson or Dexter Lawrence, right? Dexter Lawrence could easily be in the mix, in my mind, at least. Now, I agree he's had those flashes on film, but from a consistent pass rush standpoint, I haven't seen this from Lawrence until this year. A lot of guys in the mix, but for me, there is a clear-cut answer, and it's not even close. And look, we could throw Saquon Barkley in the mix, right? When you consider the improvements he made in pass pro, the improvements made with his vision, his decisiveness, getting all the things you talked about in the last podcast, he's in the mix too, for sure. But for me, the answer is a clear-cut winner here. It's Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones has taken key steps, mainly in his pocket manipulation and in his quick processing, both pre and post. I've seen so much more authority from Daniel Jones before the snaps. I showed a couple of those clips on Twitter during that breakdown I had of his 4-game stretch where he's shifting, blocking, block before the snap. Key run in the red zone of Saquon Barkley. Daniel Jones motions out before the snap to the 2 tight ends and changes the blocking for those 2 tight ends, changes their play, changes their responsibility. And that leads to one of them coming around. I think it was Myrick at the time. It might have been Bellinger. I think it was Myrick. Coming around and making a key block that helps spring extra yards in that run. He's also made key alerts on 3rd downs, the one to Marcus Johnson against the Ravens that led to a 1st down. Plenty that come to mind there. So he's making pre-snap reads and pre-snap adjustments more than I've ever seen. And post-snap, that's where the real magic has started to happen from an improvement standpoint with Jones. He's just moving so much faster. Is he still not always processing reads down the field and shots that he should take down the field, or at times open guys in the red zone in those tight windows? Yes, that's still the case. But you have to understand where he's come from. For me, at least, why he wins this superlative, Nick. It's where he was at and where he's come to, or where he's come to now. Like, where has how big of a jump have we seen with him versus these other players? To me, it's been night and day for him more than any of these other players, mostly for those things, processing. And then finally, the pocket presence, right? Like, we're seeing so much less of Daniel Jones bailing to his right, plays dead. He's rolling to his right. He can't do anything. Now he's doing a good job of stepping through that, taking the B gap, running, like you said. And at times, I've even seen him reset the throwing window and make throws into new windows that I didn't always see him do a consistent job of in the past. Lastly, for Jones, one more thing. I just want to sing his praises. One more thing I've seen great improvement of. This one stands out the most to me, Nick, and this could be a whole podcast at some point that I'd love to get your thoughts on. And I even want to bring in like a Mark Schofield and quarterback guys. I don't know how or why this is the case, but he's throwing so much better off platform this year than he has at any other season. That to me can't even be tied to the coaching, really. I don't know what you can attribute to that. That just is like physical tools, traits, talent type stuff. Like the ball placement and the velocity off platform when he's throwing on the move has been so much better this year. And so I don't know why, but that's also majorly improved. So factoring in all three of those things, he's been, to me, by far and away the most improved Giant.
I agree. As Joe Shane would say, he is executing on the gotta have it plays. He's coming up in 3rd and 14, 3rd and 9. He's done it fairly regularly all throughout this season. I mean, he only has the 2 games with over 200 yards. He went for 217 against Green Bay. He went for 202 against Jacksonville. But either way, the Giants are winning football games, and it's not all Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley is, the spoon that is stirring this, but Daniel Jones has some key ingredients here, and he's playing well. Does that mean he's going to be the long-term answer here in New York? Not necessarily, but as of right now, he's playing well, and I think he's going to come out of the bye week re-energized with a little bit more to the offense. I think there's going to be a little bit more passing, because I think the Giants are going to see what happened against Seattle and realize that they need to work on their true downfield passing attack. And I think Wan'Dale Robinson will be a big part of that. And hopefully Daniel Jones can continue to grow, because the development we've seen this season has been impressive.
So I also think you're spot on about that, Nick. And that's something I've been thinking about a lot. Like, what will this Giants offense look like coming out of the bye week? And I think it's going to be a much more potent passing attack from the vertical and intermediate standpoint. But I also think about, like, from the Wan'Dale Robinson standpoint, there were some plays like in that Seattle game on film where Wan'Dale Robinson was probably going to be a key factor on a he was shooting up the seam. It was intermediate. It was vertical. And the Seahawks just said, F it. We saw what happened with this dude last week. We don't really believe in Darius Slayton and Marcus Johnson and David Sills, and we're just going to double him and we're going to bracket him. And they did that on multiple key plays in that game. And I worry that will continue to happen, because it will be harder for him to actually make plays. And that still doesn't look. The good thing about football is you're still a major factor on a play. If you're taking away 2 defenders' attention as a route runner running your route, you've made a big impact on the play already. That should open up something else for the quarterback if he sees it fast enough. But I do worry from a just pure production standpoint if that might impact Robinson.
I think it's a good point, but I don't know if the Houston Texans are the team that are going to do that.
Yeah. Not Lovie Smith.
Lovie Smith loves, just 4-3, 4 down linemen, cover 2. He loves himself in cover 2. You're going to see a lot of Derek Stingley pressing Darius Slayton, running around him, and then Darius Slayton being open in the honey hole. So I think the Giants are going to really try to attack the sidelines. They're going to be using 3-by-1 sets, sending the number 3 or the number 2 on a 7, occupying that flat defender, and then just sending another wide receiver to occupy the safety, and then you're just basically going to have 3 versus 2 to that side. I'm sure Lovie Smith will adjust a little bit, but from a scheme standpoint, I don't know if this game against the Texans is going to be the example of the Giants not having success through the air if the Texans remain consistent with what they've done, which is essentially just cover 2 and then cover 3. And also Dallas Goedert, he freaking ripped up this team, right? I wish Daniel Bellinger was healthy, because I know he would be able to do this. I think you're going to see a lot of tight ends by the sidelines, little tight end checkdowns to be mixed in with the intermediate passing attack that I think should be successful.
I think you're right. I think we're going to see our best intermediate passing attack of the season against the Texans. I'm excited about it. I think we're going to come out of this bye with a lot of different passing concepts we haven't really leaned on, and we're going to start to lean on them. So we'll see what happens there. Let's go to Rookie of the Year so far for the Giants. This is an interesting one. I have a pick. I've debated changing my pick. I'm still in the process right now. I think by the time you make your pick, I'll make my final choice. My original pick might not be the same as it is now.
Yeah, this is difficult, because when I first saw this, I went with an opposite answer from you, and I'm leaning towards the answer that you had down. But the 2 players that are on my mind is Kayvon Thibodeau and Daniel Bellinger. I think Daniel Bellinger is a huge factor to what the New York Giants wanted to do offensively through the first half of the season. And not even just because he's a receiver. I think he has like 16 catches and the 2 touchdowns on the year, but it's his ability as a blocker and it's his toughness and it's removing him from the lineup and putting a much less blocking tight end out there in 12 personnel when it is not just Chris Myrick out there in 11 personnel. And I think that significantly hinders what the Giants want to do on the ground, which hinders what Daniel Jones can do off the play action bootleg, which affects the passing attack overall. So I think there is a strong case for Daniel Bellinger as the rookie MVP, and people would be like, "Oh, that's a slight on Kayvon." I'm like, no, it's not necessarily a slight on Kayvon Thibodeau. I think ultimately I'm going to go with Kayvon Thibodeau, but I think that 4th round pick tight end in a game where it's so difficult for rookie tight ends to have success, Dan, I think it's neck and neck between Bellinger and Kayvon, but I think ultimately I'm going to go with Thibodeau. He has a game-winning, game-sealing strip sack on Lamar Jackson, and he's applying more pressure than I feel like people are giving him credit for. So ultimately, I'm going to go with Thibodeau.
Yeah, I originally went with Thibodeau, and I think a good point that you made is as to why I'm sticking with Thibodeau is the game-winning plays that he's made. So first of all, a lot of people have thought this has been a disappointing rookie season for Thibodeau just because the box score stats don't show it. But I think a lot of the impact he's making isn't showing up in the box score. He's had some plays, like the biggest play of their win against the Packers was the Dexter Lawrence sack. I'm not sure that Dexter Lawrence sack doesn't happen if Kayvon Thibodeau doesn't have that special get off and forces the right tackle to try to climb the arc and push him up the arc, forces Aaron Rodgers to step up inside right into Dexter Lawrence's hand. He also has the tip pass, right, where he batted the ball at the line of scrimmage on the play before Xavier McKinney did the 3rd down. Well, you still need that, right? McKinney did it on 4th down to seal the game, but you still need the 3rd down tip as well. And he's had multiple balls batted at the line of scrimmage overall the season, not always in as high leverage moments, but multiple balls. How about when he chases down Travis Etienne on a long run that might have been a touchdown without that chase down from the opposite side of the field? So on the flip side of that, you got Daniel Bellinger, who catches a touchdown against the Panthers, which makes a big difference, catches the game winner against the Ravens, which makes a big difference, and ultimately plays a big role as a key cog as a blocker. And we obviously saw the blocking in the run game was a lot worse without him. And again, as we look back on the film, we did it on the film analysis. We talked about this, Nick, but the weirdest part about that game was it wasn't really like the Seahawks were doing what the Jaguars were doing, right? Like the Jaguars are so aggressive in shooting the gaps and penetrating the gaps with their second level guys. The Seahawks didn't even really do that much of that, and they didn't really stack the box. They weren't playing a ton of like cover one single high safety. It was just kind of just discipline in your run fits. And so part of that, to me, at least what stands out is when that type of thing happens, like, oh, well, there's probably some poor execution at times from the Giants tight ends or from the missing piece without Bellinger. So I think a case can be made for Bellinger, but overall, I feel like more of the game-altering plays have come from Kayvon Thibodeau. So Thibodeau remains my pick.
And another thing, too, you go to like PFF, all those PBUs and those pass deflected at the line of scrimmage, when you're on the defensive tab, I don't see them be accounted anywhere. Like it's not in the coverage because he wasn't technically in coverage, and I don't see any
That's weird.
type of batted pass down. Oh, wait, no, I do here. I think I'm just an idiot. I think bat is that, but he only has accounted for 2, and they were both against.
He's had more than 2.
He's definitely had more than 2. He had the 2 against Green Bay, but I want to say he has maybe another 2. It was like just grazed his finger and resulted in an incomplete pass. So I just think the rap on Kayvon Thibodeau is a little bit unfair. I think he is better than people are suggesting. And the 1 sack, people are all hung up on the 1 sack, but he has a lot of those pressures have resulted in incomplete passes. I'll say that much. And I think he's primed for a nice, strong second half of the season. But that kind of leads us into the next topic, which is best value draft pick. And I think a lot of people can kind of put 2 and 2 together as to why we had to add this superlative into the podcast.
Yeah, it's Daniel Bellinger. Who could even make the case for being a better value pick right now for the Giants and Bellinger in the 4th round, getting that much out of him? I mean, look, some people would probably argue, Nick, that if Darian Beavers doesn't get hurt, he would have a case for it right now because he might be playing a high percentage of the snaps at linebacker. That remains to be seen. I hope he recovers well from the ACL, comes back and plays an impact on this defense or makes an impact on this defense. But as far as what's left without the injuries and even factoring in Bellinger missing some time, to me, it's clear-cut Bellinger for this pick.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. He's just been an absolute stud, and we've kind of laid out all the reasons as to how important he is. That's just another thing the New York Giants are going to have to combat coming out of this bye week against the Houston Texans is try to figure out a way to replace Daniel Bellinger. And guess what? They're facing a team Now, we want them to get the passing attack going, but this is a team who surrenders the most rushing yards per game on average. So you're going to see a heavy dose of Saquon Barkley, and hopefully the Giants tight ends can hold up and block a little bit better. Maybe Cager has a little bit more as a blocker than we'd imagine, because Tanner Hudson, man, it was a little bit of a struggle to watch him last week.
Yep. And to be fair, though, the Seahawks did allow 4.9 yards per carry going into that Giants game. So, and they beat him with discipline. So I hope that's not the case with the Texans. There'll be a less disciplined defense. Let's hope for. I will say this one really interesting thing. If you want hope, now remember the draft is a crapshoot. Even Joe Shane, we don't even say Joe Shane. Let's say like even Ozzie Newsome, the legendary GM Ozzie Newsome, doesn't get every pick right and isn't always going to hit on a pick. But having said that, Joe Shane did nail the Bellinger pick in the range where, even after, but we'll just call it the range where the Giants got back for the Kadarius Toney trade, right? That pick is going to probably be like 101, 102, that Toney pick, maybe 99, 97, I don't know, somewhere in that range, that comp pick. And so that's about a little ahead of, but just in the same range as the Bellinger pick. So that does give me hope that, if he can hit twice in a row in that range, we'll be able to at least get a really immediate impact contributor who can make up for what they lost potentially. It's all potential, but what they potentially lost with Kadarius Toney. So just something else to consider.
So, Dan, we take our superlatives really serious here on the Big Blue Banter podcast. So the offensive player of the year superlative, does that have to be different than the X factor?
Yes, to me it does, because the X factor, okay, so you could be the best offensive player, you could be the best X player, like offensive player, we'll say for this example, but not have the biggest impact on your team, right? Like, let's say Daniel Jones was playing at an even higher level than he's playing at now, and he's played at a really good level again for that 4-game stretch and overall. But if he was playing at an even higher level, but not quite the level of Andrew Thomas, who is arguably the best left tackle in the league, or not quite the level of Saquon Barkley, who's probably the second or third, or maybe some would say first best running back in the league right now, I still think Daniel Jones you can make a case for him being the offensive player of the year or the X factor, either or. I'm sorry, the X factor, not the offensive player of the year. Sorry, I said that wrong. But being the X factor, just because positional value, right? And just because the impact that they're actually making on the field towards winning and losing. But as far as just who's been the best offensive player this year, regardless and taking away any of that, to me, it's been Andrew Thomas. He's just been arguably the best left tackle in the NFL, if not the second or third best. Again, you can make that case for Barkley too, so it is an interesting debate. But I think at least you have more guys in the running there with Nick Chubb and Derrick Henry.
Yeah, well, Saquon Barkley was my X factor, so I'll go as well with Andrew Thomas, just like you, in terms of offensive player of the year. And we have about a podcast and a half talking about these two players, so you guys can listen to that. But there's nothing but praise for Andrew Thomas. I'm just glad nationally he's starting to get recognized for what we've all kind of started to see last season, even at the end of his rookie year, which there were a couple rough games against Baltimore, against the Cardinals, but in 2021, he was damn good. And then this season, he's playing unreal. It feels good to have a really stable left tackle, not somebody that you're looking to replace.
Yeah, it's pretty sick. We have potentially this for the next 10 years, which is just so awesome, man. We've gone through so much bad play over the last 5-10 years as fans, left tackle play. And we've seen just the kind of derailment it can have on your entire offense when you have bad offensive line play, specifically bad tackle play. And right now it feels like, barring injury, we're not going to have that for the next decade from that left tackle spot. And the same cannot be said yet about the right tackle spot. Hopefully we get there. That's not a guarantee by any means, but we know it at left tackle. So that feels so good. How about defensive player of the year?
Defensive player of the year for the first half, I think, has to go to Dexter Lawrence. I think Dexter Lawrence, as we talked about, biggest improvement. I think he is also someone who has taken games over several times this season, has imposed his will. And as I've said previously, I think he is now in the conversation, maybe even solidly in the conversation for top 5 game-wrecking interior defensive lineman in the NFL, which is not said lightly, because you have guys like Chris Jones, you have guys like Grady Jarrett, Aaron Donald. So it's a tough group to crack. But obviously Jeffrey Simmons as well. He's a stud. So I think Dexter Lawrence is in that conversation at least. So, and I think he can only go up from there. And I think he will, because he is young, explosive, and just incredibly difficult to block.
Yep, you nailed that. So we can move on. We've talked a lot about Dex. How about players that need to improve the most, or player that needs to improve the most in the second half?
I think anybody who listens to the Big Blue Banter podcast and watches the All-22 on our YouTube, they know who we're going to say.
Yeah, so this will be an argument between Tay Crowder and Jalen Smith. But I will say this: let's pitch both sides of that argument. Who needs to improve more of those two? Go ahead. Were you going to say
I
something?
would say that I think people can also make an argument for the wide receivers.
Well, that's what I was just gonna say.
Yeah.
What I've gotten when I posted this on Twitter, the superlatives. What I got in my mentions was a furious response, and it's to be expected from fans. This is where the narrative is. This is the accepted. It's hard to get Giants fans to agree on anything. They agree that we have Andrew Thomas, one of the best tackles in the NFL. One thing Giants are just dug in on is that the wide receivers are just beyond bad, worse in the NFL, worst thing you can ever imagine. So that was like a big, pushback right there. They're like, no, don't even talk about the linebackers. The wide receivers need to improve the most. So we can talk about that part of it after, but let's start with our picks, which were Crowder and Jalen.
Yeah, Crowder and Jalen Smith. We saw in the Jacksonville game. Like, it's incredible that the Giants won that football game, man. That's how bad the second level was in terms of containing the run, and the fact that Jacksonville just didn't know how to hit an open hole several different times. It's something that came up. Their vision as runners was pretty pathetic in that game, but all throughout the season, and even what Wink Martindale kind of tells you, he doesn't really want to put the linebackers out there if he doesn't have to. If he has to match 12 personnel, more than likely you're going to see the linebackers out there. But I even think there are times when the Giants were out there against 12 personnel, but it was like a Josiah DeGuara, so it was a little bit lighter, where you saw quarter personnel, where you didn't see any linebackers out there. There has to be an improvement for me. It's not from the wide receivers. It's from Crowder and Jalen Smith. And I also think the improvements that those two players can make, I feel like there's more range for those two players to improve rather than the wide receivers, because David Sills isn't just going to turn into Jamar Chase and just running faster and jumping higher and creating separation a lot more. Whereas a lot of the issues with Jalen Smith and Tay Crowder are in the mind, and it's from a diagnosing standpoint. So from that perspective, I think it's easily the linebackers.
That's a great point. The second point you made there, I think, they're both good points. But the second point is really telling because there is more room for growth for these linebackers than these wide receivers. Having said that, there are some, you could see Marcus Johnson play better than he has potentially because he's already creating separation. He just needs to catch the football, and make better plays on the ball. And Wan'Dale Robinson is someone who I don't want to say can improve because he hasn't been bad, but he can show more. Like he can do more things for this offense in the second half. I think Darius Slayton's playing really good football. So for me, why it came down to the linebackers is at least on the wide receiver side of the ball, they are getting good production from Darius Slayton right now. Really good production, if we're going to be honest. I mean, Darius Slayton in that Seahawks game could have had a huge game for the Giants if Daniel Jones throws either of those deep balls, especially the wide open one that he just completely processed poorly and missed. And so then there was great separation and a great route run. We've gone over that play already. You can find it on our Twitter, on my Twitter, or on the YouTube page more importantly. But there's still a little bit more juice for me at the wide receivers. At linebacker, I think you saw it in the Jaguars game. Maybe it changes a little bit with them moving Crowder out of the mic if they stick with this and keeping Jalen Smith in the mic. Maybe. But ultimately, if I'm looking for one issue on this Giants defense, and part of this, Nick, is they haven't played Mahomes or Josh Allen yet, or Tua yet. Let's just call them, because Tua right now in the Dolphins, no matter how you want to cut it, you don't want to give Tua credit. That's on you. That's fine. And I don't care. I'm not going to get into that debate. But that passing offense is one of the best passing offenses in the NFL by far right now. It's the Dolphins, the Chiefs, and the Bills who can consistently throw the football right now in the NFL. Who else am I missing anyone? But the Dolphins are certainly in there. Am I missing anyone?
No, you look around, Kyler and the Cardinals aren't there. The Chargers are horrendous.
Chargers are close, but not there with the injuries. Yeah.
Now Seattle, like Seattle, a lot of people don't like to.
Yeah. I can definitely put Seattle in there. Seattle's 4. Anyone else? Not really.
Consistently. Right? I mean, the Eagles are a weird one.
Eagles are in there. If they want to, they can. They clearly proven when they want to pass the ball deep, they can. And then
like Cincinnati is so like they're just a different team every week, but you know the potential is there. Yes.
Yep. So the Giants have faced, because they haven't faced the Eagles yet. They faced Seattle. They faced one of these teams who can do this, right? But for the most part, they haven't. So I haven't really seen the stress on the corners that we thought we were going to see, right? The stress on the coverage. But what I have seen is the stress on the linebackers, the impact these second level players are making on the defense, performing and executing their job versus not. And the second level have been the big hole for this Giants defense the entire season. Even in games where they were better, like against the Seahawks, they're still not making plays in coverage. They're still not dropping the depth you want them to drop to at times. They're still not, they're not good one-on-one in coverage. So they're not really great blitzers. I don't think Crowder's a little better than Smith, but it is what it is, and it's the instincts. It's the inability to make those plays sideline to sideline that stands out to me the most. So I would
And
have to
another
put it above. Yeah, go ahead.
another just frustrating because like we were hoping Micah McFadden would come out of the bye week and have a bigger role. We've said that on previous podcasts, but I feel like when you put the rookie in there without Xavier McKinney and Julian Love now
Oh
kind of
yeah,
handling another role, Xavier McKinney, how many times this season we see Xavier McKinney pointing something out like,
pointing.
hey, you
Yeah,
got to be there. Like from and Julian Love has that same ability to do that. That's not the point. The point is now Julian Love, who knew what he was doing up close to the line of scrimmage or wherever he was, now has to be put back, which means Dane Belton has to replace Julian Love, which Dane Belton doesn't have the type of comprehension in this system that Xavier McKinney had. So it's just a step down. So if Micah McFadden wants to find the field, he's not going to have Xavier McKinney next to him and be like, hey, you got to get out there on the tight end, dude. Like, get the hell out there, because that's happened
right.
like 3 times on tape
I
where
know.
Micah McFadden wasn't in position pre-snap and he was exploited twice. And last week against Seattle, it happened. And McKinney's like, go, 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 go. And then Micah McFadden ends up actually getting out and making the tackle. But still, pre-snap, he wasn't aligned where he needed
That's
to
the
be.
reason he made the tackle, because of McKinney, as you said.
Yes.
That does. If
So
he
that's
doesn't do that, McKinney, what's going to happen on that play? Well, we might give up a big play. And what if that happens now because McKinney's out, right? So it's a great point. And that might be a reason we might not see as much McFadden. Just something to keep in mind. All right, let's close out with a few more of these fun ones. We're going to close out with best veteran free agent acquisition, second half breakout prediction, and also the player we're most looking forward to returning from injury. Because there's a ton of injured guys on this roster. There's a lot of guys in the mix for that one. And some of them we're really looking forward to. So let's start with the best veteran free agent addition for the Giants.
Yeah, we're not going to go over Moreau here because he got the biggest surprise. So we're looking at Justin Ellis. We're looking at Jihad Ward. We're looking at Nick Williams. A lot of guys in the interior.
Lewinsky.
And you got Mark Lewinsky, and you got John Feliciano, and you have Richie James. So there's a decent amount of players that you can go over here. And I think I'm going to go with Jihad Ward. I think Jihad Ward has his faults sometimes, but I think he's made a lot of impact plays earlier in the season. I think he's a physical run defender. I think one way the Giants did well to adjust to power gap schemes that the Ravens were running against them, where they were running a lot of GT counter, pulling the backside guard, pulling the backside tackle, is you use Jihad Ward and the fact that he is 290 pounds and you run him directly at the inside shoulder of that pulling guard and you eliminate him, and you cause the running back to not really have a lot of blockers getting to where they need to be because Jihad Ward is just taking out the pullers, and then you just scrape and replace another linebacker to contain, which the Giants did pretty well towards the end of that game. But overall, he's playing a lot of snaps, and I think he is having an impact as a run defender most of the time, I would say. So, yeah, I'm going to go with Jihad Ward.
Yeah, it's a tough call, I think, because part of me wants to at least throw in the mix Nick Williams, because I just think these interior defensive linemen don't get a lot of credit. You know, I was watching last night, dude. My boy, I love bringing him up because he had such a good game last night. Did you watch the Sunday Night Football game last night, Chiefs Titans?
Of course.
So you know who I'm going to bring up, right?
I feel like you could bring up a lot of people. So
No,
I'm
ex-Giant.
Really...
Okay, all right, it's fine. You wouldn't know.
Oh, an ex New York Giant.
Yes, interior defensive lineman.
Interior defensive lineman. I mean, no, I'm drawing a blank.
So Mario Edwards, who
you're going back.
Season,
Okay.
I love his one season with the Giants was like wildly underrated. He was like on film showing up week after week. They had to run him out at edge last week. This is like an interior dude. They had to play him at edge last night because they're so beat up at edge. Brad Dupree went out. They lost Howard Landry. He comes up with a huge sack, a forced fumble, I think it was. And he has another huge pressure in that game. And it's just like, these interior guys that the Giants have been doing a good job of scooping up: Edwards, Austin Johnson, now Nick Williams. They make a bigger impact on film than anyone realizes because they don't show up in the box score ever. That's the thing with these dudes. They're no names in the box score. They don't pick up stats, but on film, it's like that guy doesn't do it. If Nick Williams isn't here, they're not making this play, right? Like they're just not going to be able to make this play. Now the case can be made. Look, if you put like a Henry Mondu or any of those dudes instead of him, can he do the same? Can he execute the same responsibility? Maybe. But I think I've seen enough on a film on Williams that I like that I'm going to give this one slightly to Williams over Jihad Ward. There's a case to be made. I think Ward's probably the popular pick. I just wanted to do something different though for this one.
Yeah, I like the Nick Williams call. I think 32-year-old journeyman defensive tackle who's stepping in and who made pretty damn big plays against Green Bay and against Baltimore. So I think I like the fact that he's made the superlative list because you're right. The Giants seem to always have these veteran defensive linemen who don't really get the credit that they deserve for the impact plays that they have. Austin Johnson last year was exactly that. Danny Shelton was not, and that was the player that we thought it was going to be. Now, second half breakout. And this one's interesting because the Giants just lost one of their best players to a freaking hand injury, and that could open the door for a safety to have a breakout. So who do you have in mind, and does it correlate with what I just said?
My breakout's going to be a little different than yours, actually, Nick. And I think there's a lot of options here, actually, because I'm also factoring in just players who haven't played due to injuries. And so my pick is going to be Evan Neal. I think Evan Neal is going to come back from this injury, dude, and look like, and not just because he's back from injury, but because he's had more time, he's had played more reps. He started to look that way anyway before the injury, but I think he's going to look like a different player. And I think he's just going to have that second half of his rookie season, similar to the one Andrew Thomas had in his second half as a rookie. If we remember back, Andrew Thomas struggled a lot in his first half as a rookie, settled in, had a really strong second half as a rookie. I think we'll see something very similar. I think it'll be different because I think Andrew Thomas's second half as a rookie was probably weighted evenly, or had a big chunk of like run game impact, especially as they start to really run the ball that year. I think Neal's will more so be, he'll just be more competent and really good in pass pro and have some flash in the run game, but be more heavily weighted toward what he's contributing as a pass protector. But I'm going to give it to Evan Neal. I think he's in for a really nice second half.
I love the Evan Neal call right there. Now, he kind of is my answer for the next question that we'll go over. But as for second half breakouts, I'm looking at the safety position specifically, and I think I'm going to go with Dane Belton, but I think it can easily be Landon Collins, and that's why I'm very excited. Look, I think Dane Belton could have easily have had 2 interceptions. One kind of bounced off his face mask, and that's on him. It was a rocket by Lamar Jackson. And then last week, if Jihad Ward doesn't make a good play and bat the ball down at the line of scrimmage, that was probably a pick 6, and the Giants could be 7-1 right now. Like that could have been a game-altering play. I just think Dane Belton does such a damn good job baiting quarterbacks and transitioning whenever they're running pattern match or something like that. If somebody drags underneath his zone and he's in the box, he does a really good job kind of attaching to that hip, but keeping his eyes on the quarterback and feeling where that wide receiver is going and what their position is. And if he sees the quarterback's eyes transition off to another adjacent type of route, because we know a lot of routes just feed off of each other, he does a very good job coming off of his original assignment and undercutting that route. He did it in college at Iowa. He's done it even so far this season. It just hasn't resulted in any interceptions, and I think it's going to. So I think I'm going to go with Dane Belton. Now, he's not a polished prospect, and there are some times where I'm like, oh my God, dude, like, what are you doing? But overall, I think he can make huge impact plays on a team where the Giants, they have 1 interception this year. They don't intercept balls. So I think he can, if the Giants start intercepting passes, it can go a long way. And I think Belton has that within his arsenal. So I'm going to go with him. And I think Landon Collins should be factored into it as well. His role could expand coming out of the bye week now that Xavier McKinney is not there.
Yeah, I'd like that call a lot. And I'm hoping you're right, because they're going to need some safety help without McKinney for damn sure. All right, give me the player. We'll wrap it up here with the last superlative. The player you're most looking forward to returning from injury.
It would be Evan Neal for everything that you said, but I also want to add Azeez Ojulari into this mix. And it could be Ellerson Smith, who's already back, but I'm going to go with Azeez, and I'm not really 100% certain when he is going to be back and fully healthy with the calf injury that has lingered now. But I see the All-22, and I see how teams are scheming against Kayvon Thibodeau because they don't respect the edge rusher to the other side. In a lot of those situations, it's Jihad Ward. You saw it a lot against Jacksonville, where they kept the tight end in, where they kept the running back in, and they just double-teamed Kayvon, and they allowed Jihad Ward to go up against Juwan James or whatever. Jihad Ward couldn't really do anything because he doesn't add that much as a pass rusher. But you bring Azeez Ojulari back with Kayvon Thibodeau, or even O'Shane Ximenez back, or Ellerson Smith starts to find his stride. I think it's a lot more difficult for those passing offenses to really key in and focus on Kayvon Thibodeau, specifically with Azeez Ojulari. So I'm really excited to get Ojulari back whenever that is.
Yeah, it's Ojulari for me for damn sure. I think Nick laid out the case perfectly. Again, a lot of people disappointed in Kayvon Thibodeau's rookie start, whatever. Guess what? When he gets Azeez Ojulari on the field, that disappointment's going to go away, because we see it when we watch the film. They don't respect anyone from a pass rushing standpoint on the edge except for Kayvon Thibodeau. That will change if Azeez Ojulari is fully healthy, especially because we believe that he will be in his second year. In his second year, he'll have a much wider array of pass rushing moves, a bigger pass rushing repertoire and arsenal to throw at opposing right tackles or left tackles, depending on where he's lined up. And that alone will start to command more respect. And then obviously give Kayvon Thibodeau more matchups that work into his favor. So to me, this defense can take its biggest step by getting those four on the field at the same time. Ojulari, Thibodeau, Leonard Williams, and Dexter Lawrence. That's when the Giants could start to look like, oh crap, it's late November, it's early December. The weather is terrible. Quarterbacks cannot throw through this weather for the most part. And guess what? It's all about the trenches. And what's happening in the trenches? Well, you have four dogs in the trenches between those four dudes, and they're just impacting every play on a run game standpoint. They're impacting every play on the pass game. And so that's really, to me, where the ceiling of this specific roster, right, the one they have right now for 2022, even if they make the playoffs, we hope they do, but even if they don't, but let's say they do, the ceiling is the defensive line becomes a dominant force. That, to me, is the narrative right now. Earlier this year, I would have told you maybe it's Kadarius Toney comes back and makes a big impact on offense, and they can turn this offense to a next level offense. Right now, to me, with where we're at from the roster standpoint, what we have moving forward, it's, to me, this defensive line comes back fully healthy. They mesh together, and they start to take over football games.
And I also, even with someone like O'Shane Ximenez, we see Kayvon Thibodeau, and he might still maintain this even with the healthy bodies back. He plays Sam a lot.
Right.
That's his role. So that means he's dropping into coverage. He's over the tight ends. I think he'll probably maintain that role, but I think you can get more creative if he's not having success over there, and you could put him on the weak side and allow O'Shane, who we know Wink Martindale trusts in that role, or even Ojulari to thrive in that role. Whereas Wink Martindale, that is, doesn't really want to put Jihad Ward as the Sam because he doesn't really offer as much dropping into coverage from the curl flat area. He'll drop him middle hook when he's in a 2-point stance over the middle of the field, and he'll just try to undercut, the number 2 and the number 3 crossing the field. But I think it will give the defense a little bit more flexibility as to where you can align Kayvon Thibodeau to allow him to have maybe a little bit more one-on-one rushes, which will result in sacks, which is what everybody wants from Kayvon.
I love it, Nick. All right, that's all we have for today. That's the Giants superlatives at the midseason point. If you enjoy this content, please hit the subscribe button. Hit that bell button. That'll give you an alert every time a new video is dropped. As always, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts as well. Have a great rest of your week. We will talk to you soon.